Yep, no sandwiches today, but it wouldn't be a hike without some sort of 7-Eleven stop. It just feels like it's part of tradition at this point. And yes, we're on a small hike today because Happy New Year. It is early January and it is hot. But I do just want to say real quick, thank you guys for the really strong start last year. The videos did way better than I expected for a new channel. So I really appreciate you guys subscribing and watching. It's been really awesome. So yes, like I said, small hikes. I probably should have started the channel a bit earlier last year. Like I said, had a pretty good start, sort of 5 or so videos, and then it just got too hot. We've just had several weeks of, a lot of 40-degree days scattered in there. This weekend, it's a little bit cooler. I think we're hitting a max of 31 today, so I thought we'll get out there and film a video. And I've got a few small videos like the one today that should be ideal for this sort of weather. So shout out to a Brendan's Odyssey viewer named Doug. He sent me an email about this place all the way back in May 2024. I've struggled since then to figure out how to film this place for a Brendan's Odyssey video, as you'll soon see as we start exploring, but I think it'll be perfect for the format of Brendan Goes Outside. So I guess in the drive here, I didn't really explain what we're looking at. I guess that's kind of important, isn't it? Supposedly, we're gonna go check out a homestead. Well, that bit's not supposedly. The supposed bit is that supposedly it's one of the oldest homesteads in Western Australia. So we'll get into the how and if and everything else about that as we progress, but we'll be walking very close to the suburb of Averly. So we're not too far out, but we're actually technically in the suburb of Belhus. So we're currently parked next to Corona Park, which is on Corona Way. The actual homestead itself is on public property, but there's a very thin strip of public open space we can walk down to check it out. So if you want to see more after my walk today and you're not able or you just don't want to, some legends actually created photospheres of the entire walk on Google Maps. So photospheres, if you're not aware, is basically Street View, but someone has gone in there with a consumer device and created captures all the way down. So I'm not sure how to view it on mobile, but on desktop, basically if you just zoom into this little area around here and start dragging the little man, you'll see the little blue dots appear and you can check out each one individually. They've created captures at intervals all the way along. So that was from 2019 when they created those captures. So it looked pretty overgrown. So we'll see how it is today. Development has encroached right onto it. So it's either gonna look way better or it's gonna look a lot worse. So if Choice, or whatever that consumer organization is, they're to be believed, apparently the claims on the Cancer Council sunscreen of SPF 50+ are complete bunk. I did a little bit of research into it. The Cancer Council, of course, disagree with the findings. And I was hoping to find a bit more of a definitive answer. But the matter of the fact is, I've already paid for it. So there's only a little bit left in the tube, so gosh, it must be better than no protection whatsoever. Like I said, not too hot today, but the UV doesn't rest in Australia. It can be the middle of winter and I feel like the UV rating is always still quite high. So remember, slip, slop, slap, and then all those other things they added on after I was in primary school and never got taught. Shelter. So here is Corona Park in all its glory. I couldn't find any information about this track online, however. Well, not much anyway. Let's go check out this dam real quick. So the dam's pretty full today. So this dam was actually created for a mill, but we'll get into that further on in the video. And because of this giant body of water and a potentially overgrown track, I will have to be careful about snakes today because it is snake season. So I've got my stomping boots on as opposed to the Kmart trainers I'm usually wearing. So yeah, I'm just gonna stomp around and hopefully scare them away and we can all live in harmony. So I spotted this sign on Street View from Corona Way. I was hoping it'd have some information about the track. So straight away it doesn't seem too overgrown, too egregious. So a lot of what we're looking at here is the remains of a mill run. And over here, where we can hear the water running, originally there was a sluice gate that fed the mill, but now there is a concrete culvert. My source on Inherit actually said it was a PVC pipe. So I guess since then they've upgraded. Yeah, it's actually great to see that it's running. Not surprising really, considering how full the dam is. But yeah, as far as I believe, this is all man-made. This is the man-made dam, and this will factor into the story later on. Well, we have an electric fence. It's off to a good start. Like I said, we're on a strip of public open space at the moment, so there will be no trespassing in this video. I might just go have a quick peep at this dam though, since someone's already gone to the trouble of stamping down the fence. I do believe this is still government land up here, however. This is not someone's private property. Whoa, look at that. I wasn't expecting to have quite a nice view. So you can see rooftops and light poles over there in that direction. In fact, you can see houses up there. You can't see any of those in the 2019 Street View captures. I had actually envisioned a really cool drone shot over all of this, but you can't really tell from here, but it's pretty fucking windy today. And I don't quite fancy losing my drone in the drink. You can kind of see the trees over there moving. It is nice and protected down here, however. But also saying that, I didn't think I would get quite a good view. Yeah, that's the dam. So clock that, as that is quite important to the story. So this property was originally granted to a businessman named George Leek in 1829 for the purposes of farming. Back then, it was 15,000 acres. There was no property boundaries out here at all before that point. He named it the Ellen Brook Estate, which is what a nearby suburb you're probably all aware of shares the same name. He didn't reside or work on the land, however, instead working as a merchant in Fremantle because he would get more of an immediate income stream since he was fresh off the boat. So he formed a partnership with a guy named Henry Bull in 1831. He was a retired lieutenant in the Navy, but he was currently on half pay, so semi-retired, I guess. Regardless, he worked to improve the farmland over a 4-year period in exchange for half of it, which is a pretty damn good deal, if you ask me. This is when he built a house for himself on the land, which hopefully we will soon see. So this is the original strip of public open space following this fence line here. As you can see, it is quite overgrown, running along private property. We can see the dam over there still. But unlike those Street View captures, it's now surrounded by a bunch of houses, and there's a new track here, which wasn't in the Street View. So I think I might just walk along that instead, as opposed to snake land in there. So as per the deal, Henry Bull did eventually get his land in 1838, but he later went into politics and then eventually left the colony altogether in 1844 because of an economic depression. You may have guessed already, but the suburb of Bull Creek is actually named after him. So the farm stayed in the Leek family after George's death in 1849, and then it was leased out over the next few decades. So the path is sort of going off in that direction. I'm gonna head back down here and see if we can get back on track onto the original strip of public open space. And you see this valley here. This is all the remains of the mill run. So I do wonder if I should have stayed on that side of the fence now. I guess we can cross here. This tree has been very kind and prevented me from having to climb over most of it. And there we go there. A closer look of what I believe was the mill run. Yes, this all looks a lot different than it did in the street view captures, because like I said, none of that housing was there. So this was all very, well, I say very remote. I guess even back then it wasn't that remote, but it's definitely not remote now. There's probably thousands of people I should say, living over there. Oh, and we've got some cows. Let's get a zoom of those. So, moving on in the story, after being leased for several decades, eventually the property was purchased by a guy named George Hardey Barrett-Lennard, and this was in 1897. He renamed it the Belhus estate, of which the suburb now shares the same name. However, he named it after a manor, a family manor back in Essex, England. So he grew grapes on this land and eventually became the first large-scale exporter in the state, selling to places like Europe and Southeast Asia. There we go, we get a first glimpse of the house up there. Not too bad. I've been through worse. Keeping one eye on the ground for snakes, however. Ooh, I can really feel that wind again, so I do not regret not pulling the drone out. So, as for growing grapes, the land served this purpose until at least 1954, where it was subdivided. And they still grew grapes then, but it was a much smaller operation. Eventually the land was further subdivided in 1988, and from this point onwards I assume it was sort of no longer used as a vineyard. So this is when this strip of public open space was created. At the time the property was owned by a businessman named John Roberts, who was the chairman of Multiplex. I remember Multiplex, the signs used to be everywhere. And then, you know, they got bought out or went out of business or something and gone. Like a fart in the wind. So it's getting a little bit more overgrown in here. It's still not too bad. Interesting they kept the fence up. I think they would have just brought that down. I assume that's all public open space as well. But it's kind of nice. Gives a little bit more authenticity to the trek I was going to do today. Even though we are just walking down the side of Averly. Okay, pretty good shot of the mill run there. But we've got the most overgrown part of track yet. So if there's any snakes in there, reveal yourself. How am I going to get through this? Yeah, we'll just hug the fence line and hope for the best. Ah, there we go, not so bad. Danger. So what we're looking at here could be the oldest existing residence in Western Australia, originally built somewhere between 1831 and 1833. Only the roundhouse back in Fremantle beats it by age, which was constructed in 1830. But as far as homes go, we also can't forget about the Patrick Taylor cottage all the way down in Albany. That was constructed in 1832. But by the 1980s, this cottage was greatly affected by termite damage. Thus, the building was quote unquote faithfully reconstructed using as much original material as possible. And they did use this opportunity to add in a bathroom and a kitchen, because why not? Specifically the north lean-to, which is to our left, and the veranda and the roof were all completely rebuilt. So buildings always need maintenance, especially those that are 200 years old. At what point does a house stop being its original construction? Because nothing lasts forever. They have, however, rebuilt it in the same style, using as many original materials as possible in the same location. So personally, I'm going to say it's the same house. And just to the left over there, we have workers' huts. So these are separated structures, but they do share the same roof and floor. And these originally housed the workers that picked the grapes. So this would have been built in the late 1890s. And that small building to the east, which is our right, was either the foreman's hut or a kitchen that served the workers. The estate itself hired about 20 grape pickers, but also 120 workers who cleaned and packed the grapes. So, same with the house. These structures have also been restored after termite damage, but I'm not really sure to what extent. So, a little bit of extra history for you. In 1833, the Noongar warriors, Yagan and Yagan, were close to here on the Swan River while on the run for resisting the British and also spearing various folks. They were discovered by two of Henry Bull's cattle herders, William Cruse and his brother James, both of whom were teenagers. Apparently they knew the brothers and asked for flour, but when Yagan turned around, William shot him in the back and killed him to claim a bounty. Yagan then speared William, but James escaped after then shooting Yagan. The story seems to differ a bit depending on where you read it. Maybe it's a case of only those that were there on the day really know what happened, but some saw it as self-defense while others saw it in a different way. Even back then, people in the colony weren't so happy about someone being shot in the back. But I'm not here to speculate. The sources can't even seem to agree if it happened next to the river or actually here. One source says that they actually took refuge in this homestead itself and actually died here. So, who knows? First Nations history is something I want to learn more about because I do run a history channel and Aboriginal history goes back quite far. It's all history in Western Australia as far as I'm concerned. So the bodies of Yagan and Yagan were buried near the banks of the Swan River, but since Yagan did have that bounty out for him, someone physically cut off his head to claim it, which I gotta say is pretty fucking grim. Even worse, his head was then shipped off to Liverpool in England to be studied, eventually ending up in a cemetery in the 1960s after badly decomposing. But it was eventually exhumed and returned in 1997 after a decades-long campaign by the local First Nations community. There's a memorial park you can now visit near the corners of West Swan Road and Great Northern Highway. They believe this is where his body was originally buried, and his head is now buried there too. So the park is well worth a visit. So what we're looking at here is a reconstructed mill. This was reconstructed in the 1980s, but if you've ever driven down Millhouse Road near here, I assume it's named after this building. Of course, whenever I've driven down it, I've thought of something else completely.
Nobody likes Millhouse!
So this was originally built between 1832 and 1834 by William Cruse, who was Henry Bull's servant. And it was originally operated by horsepower. But in 1837, the mill dam, the mill race, and the mill pond, and a waterwheel, which is on the other side of this building, was constructed to give the horses a rest. And then from that point onwards, it was powered by water. Cruse, along with several others, leased the mill and farm from the Leak factory. I actually have a photo that might show them from the early 1860s. When the farm later grew grapes, the mill dam was used to irrigate the vineyards. This mill was used to store wine, but eventually burnt down in the early 1900s. This reconstruction is actually operational, or at least was in the 1980s. They excavated the fire damaged remains of the original waterwheel and based a replica on it. The mill itself is just based on a few photographs, however, so it may not be entirely accurate, but the equipment inside is authentic to the era. So that tiny little building on a hill was the toilet. And as far as we know, that is original, although we do believe the roof has been reconstructed. So back in those days, they used removable pans, no such plumbing or even a hole. I think I would at least rather the hole, but I digress. Supposedly, there's still 2 original wooden toilet seats side by side in there. And it's thought that this was built at the same time as the cottage. So we very well could be looking at the oldest toilet in the state. So we can see the water wheel a little bit better from this angle. But over there, we can also see what is a lime kiln. Now, I don't have much information about it, but what can I tell you? It's a lime kiln. It was in a pretty rough state in the 1970s, but it appeared to get some restoration works in the late 1990s. So, quick side quest. There's Henry Bull's cottage up there. I just thought I would find out what's down this little track. I didn't spot this back in the 2019 Street View captures, so yeah, maybe there's something worth looking at down this track. And this really seems like a great spot to spot a snake. I can imagine there'd be someone sunning themselves. Ah, yes, I did read about this. I think it was on the Wikipedia page for Belhus. So, apparently there is security cameras around here, which I highly doubt, but I'll respect that they don't want me to go in here. But I think it's a monitoring station. I'll put on the screen what it is now, but yeah, if you've ever wondered, you probably didn't, but in case you did, that's what it is, apparently. Well, it said it was around here, so I just assume, because there's nothing really else around that looks like it may be that, if you get what I'm saying. Okay, according to the Googles, this just wraps around back up to where the housing is. So let's continue on our little adventure. So I am happy to report that this track is in much better condition than it was in 2019, which is probably thanks to all the houses that are now nearby. There is, however, one more thing I want to check out, and that is a bridge. So even though I wasn't really aware of this place until I received that email nearly a year and a half ago, I was actually aware of this area. When I used to be a field surveyor, I actually did the survey work for that house up there. Still a vacant lot at the time. So I was looking down here and I could see these old buildings and I could see the bridge. Yeah, I was like, what's going on there? And then sort of just didn't really think about it again after that. But funnily enough, I remember this story right near a survey mark. Yes, no escaping survey marks on this channel. I wasn't quite expecting it to be so blocked off, but it's probably for the best when you look at the condition of it. So it looks like we may be able to get a better view of it down there where there's a nice little stream. Yeah, none of this was on the street view before. Yeah, check that out. So originally there was a bridge here built of limestone, but it was more of a causeway thanks to the muddy flats. This was constructed in 1851 by convicts and Aboriginal prisoners. This was then replaced by a wooden bridge in 1896. There's a pretty good stream of water here, considering we are in early January. So the road that originally ran through here was once a very important route through the area. This now partially remains as Cruse Road, although it is now private property on the other side of this bridge. So it was a public road until about 1906, and then it was de-gazetted. So the mill after that point then fell into decline because I think it relied on the road, and it was at that point where it caught on fire. So we can see the older bridge on Landgate captures between the 1960s and the 1980s. It still looks like it would have been the main access for the estate until 1988 when it was all subdivided. That's when Corona Way and Corona Park were constructed. I bet there's a few snakes in here. If you can't tell, it's currently on my mind quite a bit. Anyway, by the 1980s, I presume the bridge was in a pretty bad state. There's a photo of it from 1976 and it doesn't look so hot. Kind of how it looks now, really. But I did read the word reconstructed for this bridge. So possibly they used the materials from the original bridge to build this. It certainly became a lot thinner. I think a vehicle may have crossed it originally. What we're looking at here is the Ellen Brook. So this flows all the way south from Gin in that direction. It passes under both the Brand and the Tonkin highways, while also running down most of the way down Brand Highway. And then, not far from us in that direction, is the Swan River. It was named after Ellen Stirling, who was the wife of James Stirling. He originally camped at the mouth of the brook on the Swan all the way back in 1827, and that was even before the settlement of Perth. I actually did read that the original footings for the bridge were here, which I'm guessing is what this is. Although I think that's from the 1896 bridge, not the original convict bridge. Let's have one final little gander. Haven't been down this way yet. Nothing down here but spiders. Dead spiders, luckily. Well, ain't that nice? Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to be walking along these. They all look pretty rotten. There we are, the mighty Ellen Brook, although not really flowing that much over here, but it is over there in the distance. Anyway, just a short and sweet video today to start the new year, 2026. Like I said, thank you so much for the great start and all of that. And if you're the owner of Henry Bull's cottage up there on the hill, I would love to go inside and film for a full, proper Brendan's Odyssey video. You can probably see why I didn't film it for a Brendan's Odyssey video, because you can just skirt around the edge. And I'm not one to trespass. But if you're the owner and you'd like to give me permission to come in, then let's talk. My email address is in the description. But yeah, that's the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. I've got plenty of awesome videos planned for this year. More camping, more hikes that involve camping, hopefully. We just have to wait for the weather to get a little bit cooler. So yeah, I do have a few smaller videos planned for the warmer months. I'll see you there. I couldn't resist. Be rude not to.